We treat matter as if it is dead. We view the objects in our lives, the jewelry we wear, the artifacts we collect, the cars we drive, as passive observers. They are tools. They are property. They are silent. But history suggests a different conclusion. The evidence suggests that some objects are not passive. They are predators. They wait. They remember. And when the conditions are right, they act. In the archives of the last 3 centuries, we find anomalies that defy statistical probability. We have a silver trumpet from the Valley of the Kings, shattered in 1939, whose sound preceded the invasion of Poland and the burning of Europe. We have a blue diamond, stolen from the eye of a Hindu idol that drove a banking dynasty into madness, suicide, and ruin. We have a German sports car built of aluminum and hubris, the little bastard that killed James Dean and then continued to maim and kill the mechanics who tried to salvage its parts. We are not telling ghost stories. We are examining evidence. We will look at the metallurgy, the chemistry, the police reports, and the autopsies. We will strip away the legend and find the hard, physical truth that remains. These are the case files of the cursed. The history of the curse begins with a violation of atmosphere. Before the silver trumpet could speak, the air around it had to be breached. On November 26, 1922, the silence of the Valley of the Kings ended. It ended with the scrape of a chisel against limestone. Howard Carter stood before the sealed doorway of Tomb K562, holding an iron rod. Behind him, Lord Carnarvon and his daughter waited in the breathless heat of the Egyptian afternoon. The workmen had cleared the 16 steps leading down into the bedrock, revealing the plaster seals of the royal necropolis. The jackal god Anubis remained stamped into the clay, the guardian of a perimeter that had held its integrity for 32 centuries. Carter made a small breach in the upper left-hand corner of the doorway. He inserted the iron rod. The space beyond was empty. The physics of this moment define the forensic narrative. When Carter inserted the candle to test for foul gas, the flame flickered. It flickered from the pressure of hot air escaping the chamber. The tomb exhaled. The air inside, sealed since the ascension of A in 1323 BC, rushed out to meet the modern world. This marked the first physical contact between the 20th century and the objects waiting in the dark. Carter widened the hole. He pressed his face to the opening. The candlelight caught the glint of gold. The antechamber of Tutankhamun functioned as a chaotic warehouse of the afterlife. Unlike the sterilized, curated museum displays of today, the room appeared as a disaster zone of piled wealth. 3 funeral couches, carved in the shapes of monstrous animals, formed a precarious wall against the far side. Chariot wheels, alabaster vases, and chests of linen sat stacked in disarray, the result of ancient priests hurriedly resealing the tomb after 2 failed robbery attempts in antiquity. Amidst this riot of gold and ebony, the object of our investigation lay hidden. It lay packed away, treated as a utility rather than an idol. Inside the antechamber, tucked among the white painted boxes containing food and clothing, sat a simple wooden casket. This was box number 21. Inside this box, wrapped in a protective layer of reeds and dried lotus flowers, lay a tube of silver. The silver trumpet measured 58 centimeters of beaten metal. It functioned as a military instrument, a device designed for the harsh acoustics of the battlefield. In the context of 1323 BC, this object served as a piece of communications technology. It signaled the movement of archers. It signaled the charge of chariots. It signaled the will of the pharaoh to inflict violence. For 3,000 years, its potential energy remained dormant. The crystalline structure of the silver slowly hardened in the dry air, becoming brittle on a molecular level. The reeds wrapping it protected it from physical damage, yet they failed to protect it from the weight of time. The instrument waited in the dark, a loaded gun with the safety catch on. The silence of the tomb remained absolute. In ancient Egyptian theology, silence constituted a component of Ma'at, the cosmic order. Noise represented Isfet, chaos. The tomb enforced Ma'at. It functioned as a machine for silence, a vacuum where the soul could navigate the duat without distraction. The presence of a trumpet, an instrument defined solely by its ability to create overwhelming noise, existed as a dormant paradox. Carter and his team catalogued the box. They noted the contents. They moved it. In doing so, they initiated the chain of custody that would eventually bring the object to a radio studio in London. They treated the trumpet as a passive artifact, a specimen of ancient metallurgy. They failed to recognize it as a functioning chaotic variable. The silence broke. The seal opened. The trumpet left its wooden sarcophagus and entered the humidity and noise of the 20th century. The architecture of silence that had held the world in balance for that specific coordinate in the Valley of the Kings collapsed, piece by numbered piece. The trumpet ceased to be a grave good. It became a curiosity, and curiosities demand to be tested. The artifact catalogued as Carter number 175 represents a triumph of ancient metallurgy and a disaster of structural integrity. To the naked eye, the silver trumpet appears as a sleek, continuous cone of metal. Under forensic scrutiny, it reveals the violence of its creation. The ancient smiths hammered this object from a single sheet of silver. They beat it relentlessly over a wooden form, a mandrel, until it curled into a tube. A visible seam runs the entire length of the instrument, a jagged scar where the two edges of the silver sheet meet. They joined these edges through a process of brazing, melting a filler metal with a lower melting point to fuse the seam. This hammering process created a specific metallurgical condition, work hardening. By physically beating the silver, the smiths compressed the crystal lattice of the metal, making it harder and more resonant. Simultaneously, this process made the metal brittle. Time compounded this fragility. Over 32 centuries, the silver underwent a process known as season cracking, or intergranular corrosion. The impurities in the alloy migrated to the grain boundaries of the crystals. The metal lost its elasticity. It transformed from a malleable sheet into a rigid crystalline shell, structurally similar to glass. It retained its shape only because it remained undisturbed in the vacuum of the box. The mouthpiece offered a contrast in materials. It consisted of a sleeve of electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, fitted over the narrow end. This choice served both aesthetic and functional purposes. Gold is non-reactive. It prevented the player's lips from tasting the tarnish of the silver. It also provided a softer contact point for the embouchure. The most significant engineering feature lay at the opposite end, the bell. The bell of the trumpet flares to a diameter of 8.2 centimeters. It acts as the amplifier. On this flared surface, the craftsman incised a panel of religious data. These patterns functioned as the operating software of the weapon. The engravings depict the gods Amun-Ra, Ra-Horakhti, and Ptah. Amun-Ra represents the hidden power. Ra-Horakhti is the sun at the horizon, the god of rising power and new dawns. Ptah is the architect, the one who speaks the world into existence. The combination of these three deities defines the trumpet's function. It is a tool to manifest the hidden power of the pharaoh at the horizon of the battlefield. It is an instrument of war. Alongside the silver trumpet, lay its twin. The second instrument was forged from bronze, or perhaps a copper-rich alloy. It measured slightly shorter, 49.4 centimeters, and lacked the electrum mouthpiece. The metallurgy of copper differs from silver. It is more robust, less prone to the catastrophic shattering that affects age-hardened silver. The bronze trumpet served as the workhorse. The silver trumpet served as the ceremonial voice. Both instruments faced the same structural problem: gravity. A tube of thin metal, left horizontal for eternity, collapses under its own weight. It flattens into an oval. The Egyptians solved this with the wooden core. This critical piece of evidence explains the disaster that follows. Inside each trumpet, the priests inserted a solid wooden stopper, carved to the exact internal dimensions of the tube. It acted as an internal skeleton. For the silver trumpet, the wood was painted black. For the bronze, it was painted red. These cores performed a dual function. Primarily, they supported the metal from the inside, preventing deformation. Secondarily, they acted as a mute. A trumpet with a solid wooden core remains silent. It cannot be played. To sound the instrument, one must remove the skeleton. Removing the core sets the trap. The core supports the brittle, crystallized silver. Its removal leaves the 3,000-year-old metal unsupported, a hollow shell of eggshell-thin material waiting for a stressor. The acoustics of the Sheneb are primitive. Modern trumpets use valves to lengthen the tubing, allowing the player to hit all the notes of the chromatic scale. The Tutankhamun trumpets operate as valveless, straight-bore tubes. They are natural trumpets. They produce only notes from the harmonic series, the fundamental tone, and its overtones. The player controls the pitch solely through lip tension and lung pressure. To play this instrument requires immense physical force. The bore is narrow, the resistance is high. The player must force a column of air through a constricted tube that has not vibrated since the Bronze Age. The physics of sound is a transfer of energy. You are vibrating the metal. You are shaking the crystals. In 1939, the men who handled these objects understood the music. They lacked an understanding of the metallurgy. They saw a trumpet. They assumed it was metal. They assumed metal was strong. They held a glass ornament disguised as a weapon of war. By the spring of 1939, the political atmosphere in Cairo matched the tension in Europe. The British Empire needed a spectacle to unify its listeners, a demonstration of reach that spanned history and geography. The BBC Empire Service proposed a live broadcast. They intended to take the voice of the Boy King and transmit it to 150 million listeners. Rex Keating, the director of BBC Radio Cairo, organized the event. He envisioned a moment of profound radio drama, the sound of ancient Egypt interrupting the modern world. He secured the cooperation of the Department of Antiquities. He secured the approval of King Farouk. The logistics required a mobile recording unit, a tangle of cables running through the museum halls, and a musician capable of waking the instrument. The choice of musician determined the nature of the sound. The museum hired a soldier. Bandsman James Tappan served with the 11th Hussars, the Cherry Pickers, a cavalry regiment stationed in Cairo. Tappan understood the trumpet as a military tool. He knew the signals for charge and retreat. He approached the fragile silver tube with the lungs of a cavalryman accustomed to signaling over the noise of hooves and engines. Alfred Lucas stood as the final gatekeeper. As the chemist responsible for the conservation of the Tutankhamun collection, he understood the physical degradation of the silver. He knew the metal suffered from intergranular corrosion. Yet, the pressure for the broadcast overrode the caution of conservation. The authority of the BBC and the allure of the stunt compelled the museum staff to open the case. Sunday, April 16th, 1939, was the chosen date. The recording session, however, required a rehearsal. This rehearsal took place days before the broadcast, a private test to ensure the instruments could still speak. Tappan arrived at the museum with his own equipment. He brought a modern cornet mouthpiece. This small piece of brass represented a fundamental incompatibility. The ancient Egyptian trumpet required a direct embouchure. The player blew directly into the metal rim. Tappan, trained on modern valved instruments, required the cup of a mouthpiece to form his embouchure. The context of 1939 adds a layer of grim irony. In Europe, the Wehrmacht mobilized. In Cairo, the British Empire prepared to blow a war horn. The synchronization of these events creates the foundation of the legend. The trumpet functioned as a signaling device. The world waited for a signal. The BBC provided the medium. The stage was set for failure. The ingredients for the fracture were all present: the brittle silver, the modern mouthpiece, the forceful lungs of the bandsman, and the ignorance of the conservationists. They prepared to force the instrument to speak a language it never knew, for an audience it never courted. The rehearsal began with a misunderstanding of physics. James Tappan stood in the preparation room of the Cairo Museum. He held the silver trumpet of Tutankhamun. He treated the object as a musical instrument, assuming it possessed the resilience of a modern regimental bugle. He failed to recognize it as a calcified remain. The silver of the trumpet had undergone a specific metallurgical transformation known as age hardening. Over 32 centuries, the copper atoms within the silver alloy had migrated to the grain boundaries of the crystals. This process locked the atomic lattice in place. The metal lost all ductility. It retained its shape, but structurally, it shared more properties with glass or ceramic than with malleable metal. It possessed high compressive strength, but zero tensile strength. Tappan prepared to play. He noted the wide, raw opening of the trumpet's neck. To a modern trumpeter, this aperture presents a problem. It offers no support for the lips. It requires a brute force embouchure that few modern players possess. Tappan solved this problem with technology. He took his own mouthpiece, a machined piece of modern brass, and inserted it into the ancient tube. He applied pressure. To create an airtight seal, he pushed the brass wedge deeper into the silver neck. The physics of this action created a catastrophic stress vector. The tapered shank of the mouthpiece acted as a wedge. It converted the longitudinal force of insertion into radial force, pushing outward against the walls of the silver tube. Alfred Lucas, the chemist responsible for the collection, stood nearby. He watched the soldier handle the artifact. The room was silent, save for the shuffle of feet and the breathing of the men. They waited for a sound. The sound came, but it was not a note. It was a sharp, sickening crack, like the snapping of a dry bone. The silver trumpet disintegrated. The stress of the mouthpiece overwhelmed the crystal lattice. The metal did not bend. It shattered. Large sections of the bell broke away from the main tube. Shards of the pharaoh's herald fell to the floor, tinkling against the tiles. The silence that followed possessed an absolute weight. The men in the room stood frozen. They stared at the debris. They had just destroyed one of the most famous artifacts in the world. They had taken a sacred object, preserved by the priests of the 18th dynasty, protected by the seals of Anubis, and hidden in the dark for 3 millennia, and reduced it to scrap metal in a matter of seconds. Tappan held the remains of the tube. The modern mouthpiece remained stuck in the neck, a parasite that had killed its host. The failure occurred because they ignored the wooden core. The ancient Egyptians understood the fragility of the metal. They stored the trumpets with a solid wooden form inside to absorb shock and prevent crushing. Tappan had removed the core to play the instrument, leaving the silver unsupported. He removed the skeleton and expected the skin to stand. The reaction in the room shifted from shock to panic. The broadcast was scheduled for Sunday. The BBC had advertised the event to the empire. King Farouk expected to hear the voice of his ancestors. Cancellation was politically impossible. Alfred Lucas stepped forward. He examined the wreckage. As a chemist and conservator, he understood materials. He knew that silver could be annealed. He knew that heat could soften the crystals. The repair took place in secret. Lucas worked with the desperation of a man trying to reverse history. He used adhesives and gentle heat. He puzzled the shards back together, aligning the microscopic grain of the breaks. He rebuilt the bell. The object that emerged from this surgery was a zombie. It looked like the silver trumpet, but it was structurally compromised. It was held together by glue and tension. The acoustic properties were altered. The resonance of the metal now had to travel through layers of adhesive. This fracture event changes the context of the broadcast that followed. When Tappan eventually played the instrument on April 16th, he was not playing a pristine artifact. He was playing a broken thing. The sound that the world heard, the braying shriek, was the sound of a wounded object. The curse, in this forensic view, began with a physical assault. The modern world broke the trumpet first. The trumpet simply returned the favor by signaling a war that would break the modern world. The shattered silver mirrored the shattering of the peace in Europe. The object sitting before the microphone on the evening of April 16th, 1939, was no longer just an artifact. It was a piece of wreckage, glued and annealed into a semblance of its former shape. It held its integrity only through the tension of the repair. The atmosphere in the Cairo Museum that night carried a specific electrical weight. The BBC equipment hummed. The cables snaking through the Hall of Statues connected the dead air of the museum to transmitters capable of reaching 150 million people. The empire waited to hear the voice of the pharaoh. 5 minutes before the broadcast went live, the physics of the room shifted. The lights went out. The museum plunged into absolute blackness. The failure was total. The mains power cut out, silencing the hum of the electric lamps and leaving the technicians in a void. In the logic of the curse, this functions as the first warning. The architecture of silence reasserted itself. The modern electrical grid, the symbol of 20th century control, failed in the presence of the artifact. Rex Keating made a decision. He refused to abort the signal. He called for candles. He called for kerosene lamps. The technicians scrambled in the dark, lighting matches, creating a small, flickering pool of illumination around the microphone. James Tappan stepped into this circle of firelight. He wore the uniform of the 11th Hussars. He picked up the silver trumpet. The repair lines on the bell remained visible in the amber light. He lifted the instrument to his lips, pressing the modern brass mouthpiece into the ancient tube. The signal went live. The sound that emerged defied the expectation of music. It was a raucous, braying blast. It lacked the melodic purity of a modern orchestral trumpet. It sounded like the cry of an animal, or a shriek of raw aggression. The silver vibrated. The crystals, locked in place since the 18th dynasty, screamed under the sudden infusion of energy. 150 million people heard it. In living rooms in London, in kitchens in Berlin, in farmhouses in Australia, the sound of the pharaoh's war horn crackled through the speakers. Tappan put down the silver instrument. He picked up the bronze trumpet. This instrument, shorter and made of a more robust copper alloy, produced a different timbre. It was deeper, louder, and more authoritative. He played a second blast. The acoustic signature of the event is critical. This was a binary signal. 2 blasts, one from silver, one from bronze. In the military code of the ancient world, the trumpet did not play songs. It commanded action. It initiated conflict. Outside the museum, the world stood at a tipping point. The date, April 1939, sits in the final breathless months of the interwar period. The German army occupied Czechoslovakia. The pact of steel was forming. The world waited for a signal to begin the slaughter. The forensic coincidence is absolute. The British Empire, in a hubristic attempt to showcase its dominion over history, used the BBC to amplify a literal ancient Egyptian call to war. They broadcast it to the nations that were about to tear each other apart. The broadcast ended. The technicians packed the cables. Tappan returned the trumpets to Alfred Lucas. The museum staff returned the objects to their cases, believing the event had concluded. But a signal, once sent, cannot be recalled. 5 months later, on September 1st, 1939, the Wehrmacht crossed the Polish border. The Second World War began. The scale of the conflict matched the reach of the broadcast. A global signal preceded a global war. The curse of the trumpets is not that they kill the individual who plays them. Tappan lived. Keating lived. The curse is that they kill the peace of the era in which they are played. They are the heralds of conflict, and they had just been announced to the world. 28 years after the initial fracture, the silence broke again. The year 1967 represented a new era of technological confidence. The crackle of the 1939 broadcast belonged to a previous generation. The curators and archivists of the late 1960s possessed magnetic tape, high-fidelity microphones, and a belief that the superstitions of the past held no power over the present. Rex Keating returned to Cairo. The man who had orchestrated the 1939 broadcast sought to complete the archive. He intended to capture the sound of the pharaoh's trumpets with absolute clarity, preserving the acoustic data for future musicologists. The Department of Antiquities granted permission. The trumpets, resting in their glass cases since the end of the Second World War, were removed once more. The protocol for this session differed from the chaos of 1939. The museum staff established a controlled environment. They prioritized the safety of the artifacts, handling the repaired silver trumpet with extreme caution. They focused on the bronze trumpet, the robust workhorse of the pair, to provide the primary audio sample. The recording engineer threaded the reel-to-reel tape. The brown ribbon of ferrous oxide waited to encode the vibration. The bronze trumpet spoke. Without the fracture event of the silver instrument to distract the team, the sound emerged pure and terrifying. The tape captured the raw, abrasive timbre of the war horn. It recorded the specific frequency designed to cut through the noise of chariot wheels and dying men. The machine archived the sound. The session concluded. Keating returned to London with the reels, satisfied that the voice of Tutankhamun now existed in the safety of the BBC archives. The causality of the curse operates on a delay. In 1939, the war began 5 months after the broadcast. In 1967, the reaction proved swifter. Weeks after the recording session, the political tension in the Middle East snapped. On the morning of June 5, 1967, the Israeli Air Force launched Operation Focus. This preemptive airstrike targeted the Egyptian Air Force while it sat on the tarmac. Within hours, the air power of Egypt lay in ruins, smoking on the runways. The 6-day war had begun. The correlation demands forensic scrutiny. We have 2 distinct data points. Data point 1, 1939. The trumpets are played. The world enters the Second World War. Data point 2, 1967. The trumpets are played. Egypt enters the 6-day war, a conflict that fundamentally alters the balance of power in the Middle East and results in the loss of the Sinai Peninsula. In both instances, the instrument functioned exactly as designed. The smiths who hammered the silver and bronze in the 18th dynasty created a device to signal the onset of conflict. The modern users, treating it as a museum curiosity, inadvertently triggered the function. They pulled the trigger to hear the click, ignoring the fact that the gun remained loaded. The statistical probability of this occurring by chance remains infinitesimally low. The trumpets stayed silent for centuries. They spoke only twice in the modern era. Both times, their voice preceded a catastrophe involving the nation of their origin. This pattern forces a re-evaluation of the curse. The popular definition of a curse involves a mummy stalking a victim in the night. The forensic definition, in this case, appears geopolitical. The object acts as a catalyst for state-level violence. Following the 1967 war, the Egyptian authorities recognized the pattern. The correlation became impossible to ignore. A quiet consensus formed among the curators and the government officials. The cost of the sound exceeded the value of the history. The decision was made. The trumpets required silence. The wooden core logic returned. The museum staff returned the objects to their display cases. But this time, the context had changed. They were no longer just treasures of the boy king. They were hazardous materials. The silence that descended on the trumpets in 1967 continues to this day. But the energy released by those two broadcasts had already reshaped the world. The echoes of 1939 and 1967 proved that the artifacts of Tutankhamun retained their agency. They responded to the breath of the living with the death of the living. The first file in our anthology concludes here. The Herald of Conflict demonstrates the scale of the threat. These objects possess the power to move armies. But as we move down the ladder of intimacy, the targets become smaller. The curse shifts from the nation to the mind. We leave the burning airfields of Egypt and travel to the drawing rooms of Victorian London. There, a different kind of stone waits, one that does not call for war, but for the slow dismantling of a man's sanity. In the summer of 1857, the smoke of black powder choked the streets of Cawnpore. While the Tutankhamun trumpets lay dormant in the dark, a different violation of sacred ground took place 3,000 miles to the east. The Indian rebellion tore through the fabric of the British Raj. The violence in Cawnpore remains legendary for its brutality. The Bibigar massacre, the well of bodies, the scorched earth. Amidst this chaos of artillery fire and retribution, Colonel W. Ferris of the Bengal Cavalry entered the Temple of Indra. Indra occupies a specific tier in the Hindu pantheon. He is the king of the Devas, the wielder of the thunderbolt, and the god of storms. A temple dedicated to Indra functions as a grounding point for this volatile energy. Ferris viewed the space through the lens of a conqueror. He saw portable wealth. He located the idol. Embedded in the face of the deity sat a large purple stone. Ferris pried it loose. In that moment, he committed a double error. The first error was theological. He severed the eye of the storm god. The second error was mineralogical. Ferris identified the stone as a purple sapphire. This nomenclature persists in the historical record, the Delhi purple sapphire. Chemical analysis reveals a deception. The stone is an amethyst. The distinction matters. A sapphire consists of corundum, one of the hardest substances on Earth. An amethyst consists of quartz, significantly softer, deriving its purple hue from irradiation and iron impurities. By misidentifying the stone, Ferris assigned it a massive monetary value it did not possess. He looted a piece of quartz, believing he held a retirement fortune. The stone is large, oval cut, and unusually dark. It reflects light with a sullen violet intensity. Unlike the brilliant fire of a diamond, this stone absorbs illumination. Ferris returned to England. He brought the stone into his home. The injection phase began immediately. In epidemiology, a vector introduces a pathogen into a population. In the logic of this case, The stone acted as a vector for misfortune. Colonel Ferris, previously a healthy cavalry officer, suffered a rapid collapse of health. His financial portfolio, sustained by the spoils of empire, evaporated. The value he expected to extract from the sapphire proved illusory, while the cost of keeping it escalated. The curse manifested as a probability distortion field. Investments failed. Illnesses lingered. The family structure began to erode. On his deathbed, Ferris broke the silence. He explicitly blamed the stone. He passed the object to his son, delivering a warning that sounded like a diagnosis. The stone is deadly. The son, a man of the Victorian rationalist era, accepted the inheritance. He dismissed the warning as the delirium of a dying soldier. This skepticism allowed the curse to deepen its roots. The son experienced the same trajectory: an inexplicable loss of wealth, a decline in vitality, and a persistent run of bad luck. A friend of the family, suffering from the same inexplicable despair while in the presence of the stone, eventually took their own life. The specific method and details remain obscured by the privacy of the era, but the event marked the transition of the stone from a bad luck charm to a lethal object. The Delhi purple sapphire differs from the trumpets. The trumpets affect the macro scale, war. The sapphire affects the micro scale, the home. It sits on a mantelpiece or in a jewelry box, radiating a silent influence that corrodes the life of the owner. It works through attrition. By 1890, the object had become a burden the Ferris family could no longer sustain. They needed to eject the pathogen. They needed a new host. They found the perfect candidate. They found a man whose intellect was so formidable, so grounded in science and logic, that he would surely strip the stone of its superstitious power. They gave the stone to Edward Heron Allen. Edward Heron Allen was a polymath, a scientist, a writer, a lawyer, and a master of palmistry. He stood as a titan of the Victorian intellect. He believed in categorization, in taxonomy, in the ability of the human mind to order the chaos of the universe. He accepted the gift. He accepted the challenge. He brought the stone into his study, placed it among his microscopes and manuscripts, and prepared to analyze it. He did not realize that the analysis would eventually break him. Edward Heron Allen stood as a titan of Victorian rationality. A lawyer by trade and a marine biologist by obsession, he possessed a mind categorized by rigid discipline. He wrote the definitive text on foraminifera. He served as a fellow of the Royal Society. He believed that every effect in the universe possessed a quantifiable physical cause. However, the stone began to dismantle his reality. His haunting manifested as a sensory intrusion. It started with sound. While working late on his biological classifications, he heard movement in the corners of the locked room. He heard the distinct rhythmic sound of breathing standing directly behind his chair. When he turned, the room was empty. Logic dictated a physiological explanation. He checked his own pulse. He questioned his fatigue levels. He tested the ventilation of the room for drafts. The phenomena persisted. The breathing grew louder. Shadows detached themselves from the bookcases and moved across his peripheral vision. Heron Allen decided to run a control test. If the stone generated the curse should function independently of his ownership. He treated the bad luck as a radioactive signature, something that could be transferred. He loaned the stone to a friend, a professional singer. Within days, her voice failed. She complained of a heaviness in the chest and a series of professional disasters that threatened her career. She returned the stone, pleading with him to keep it away from her. He loaned it again, this time to a darker personality, a friend interested in the occult. This friend returned the stone within the week, refusing to speak of the specifics, only stating that the object was malignant. The scientist faced a conclusion that violated his worldview. The variable in the equation remained constant, the amethyst. The variable that changed was the owner. In every instance, the proximity of the stone correlated with a sharp decline in well-being. Heron Allen categorized the threat. He realized he dealt with an object that acted as a psychic parasite. It did not require belief to function. He, a skeptic, suffered just as the superstitious Ferris had suffered. The haunting reached its apex in 1902. The breathing in the study became intolerable. Heron Allen began to feel a physical pressure, a sensation of being pushed or guided towards self-destruction. The stone, he wrote, sat on his desk like a toad, absorbing the light and radiating malice. He attempted to rationalize the history. He researched the looting of the Temple of Indra. He understood the theological implications of the third eye. In Hindu metaphysics, the third eye, Ajna, sees beyond the visible world. By stealing the physical representation of that eye, Ferris had blinded the idol. The stone, in turn, blinded the owner's life, stripping away their clarity, their wealth, and their peace. Heron Allen made a decision. He could not destroy the stone. Mineralogy dictates that quartz fragments are just smaller pieces of the same lattice. He could not sell it. Ethics prevented him from passing the curse to an innocent. He had to neutralize it. He devised a containment protocol. He walked to Regent's Canal. He stood by the dark industrial water that cut through London. He threw the Delhi purple sapphire into the deepest part of the channel. He watched the water swallow the stone. He returned home, believing the equation was balanced. The object was gone. The variable was removed. Logic dictated that the haunting would cease. He was wrong. Regent's Canal functioned as a living artery of the city. It required maintenance. The silt at the bottom of the waterway accumulated the debris of London, coal dust, dead animals, and industrial runoff. To keep the barges moving, the city deployed dredgers. A steam-powered dredging barge moved down the canal 3 months later. Its heavy iron buckets descended into the black water, scraping the bottom of the channel. The machine did not care about curses or history. It simply excavated the mud. One bucket brought up the stone. The amethyst sat embedded in a clot of clay. A laborer on the barge spotted the unusual color against the monochrome gray of the sludge. He plucked it out. He wiped it on his trousers. He saw a large, heavy purple stone, cut with facets that suggested value. This laborer possessed no knowledge of the Temple of Indra or Colonel Ferris. He saw a lucky find, a ticket to a few extra shillings. He took the stone to Wardour Street in Soho, a district known for its curiosity shops, jewelers, and dealers in second-hand goods. The chain of custody tightened. The laborer sold the stone to a dealer. This dealer, by a mechanism of fate that defies standard probability models, knew Edward Heron Allen. Heron Allen was a prominent figure in the collecting world. He frequented these shops looking for scientific specimens and rare books. The dealer recognized the stone, or perhaps he simply knew that Heron Allen collected unusual gems. The dealer believed he was doing a favor. He believed the stone had been lost or stolen. He intended to perform a righteous act by returning the property to its rightful owner. A few days later, the doorbell rang at Heron Allen's residence. Heron Allen opened the door. The dealer presented the object. "I believe this is yours, sir. It was found in the canal." The physical return of the stone shattered Heron Allen's psychological defenses. He stared at the amethyst. It remained unchanged. The water had not eroded it. The mud had not obscured it. It had survived the industrial digestive system of London and navigated its way back to his specific coordinate in a city of 6.5 million people. This event marks the transition from curse to predation. A curse is a static field of bad luck. Predation implies intent. The stone behaved like a homing pigeon. It refused to be discarded. Heron Allen paid the dealer. He took the stone back into his study. The logic of his world collapsed. If an object can manipulate probability to this extent to ensure its own survival and return, then it possesses a form of agency. The scientist ceased to view the stone as a mineral. He began to view it as an entity. The breathing returned immediately. The atmosphere of the study grew heavy. Heron Allen realized that disposal was impossible. If he threw it in the ocean, a fisherman would catch it. If he buried it, a gardener would dig it up. The stone demanded to be witnessed. He required a new strategy. If he could not destroy it, and he could not lose it, he had to imprison it. He turned his intellect toward the design of a containment vessel. He would not trust the water again. He would trust locks, seals, and the vaults of a bank. The 7-layer protocol began to form in his mind. He would construct a prison of silver and boxes, a Russian doll of barriers designed to suffocate the influence of the third eye. He accepted that he would be the warden of this object until his death. The canal experiment had failed. The stone had won. He began with the stone itself. He refused to let the amethyst sit loose in a box where it might rattle or shift. He designed a custom setting. He took silver, a metal traditionally associated with lunar energy and purity, and fashioned a ring. This ring took the form of a double-headed snake. The serpents twisted around the violet stone, their jaws clamping down on the quartz. This design served a functional purpose. The snake eating its tail, or in this case, holding the center, represents the Ouroboros, the symbol of eternal binding and cyclical entrapment. Heron Allen used the silver to physically cage the eye of Indra. He added 2 amethyst scarab beetles to the assembly, ancient Egyptian symbols of rebirth and protection, creating a mineralogical circuit designed to dampen the energy of the central stone. He placed this assembly into the first box. This box was small, likely leather or wood, lined with velvet. He sealed it. He placed this box inside a larger box. He repeated the process. The 7-layer protocol utilized the logic of a Russian doll, Matryoshka. Each layer created a barrier of dead air and physical matter between the stone and the outside world. Before sealing the final layer, Heron Allen drafted a document. He wrote it by hand on heavy paper. This letter remains the primary piece of forensic evidence for the psychological state of the scientist in 1904. It functions as a warning, a confession, and a legal will. He wrote, "This stone is trebly accursed and is stained with the blood and the dishonor of everyone who has ever owned it." The use of the word trebly refers to the 3 owners, Colonel Ferris, the Ferris heir, and Heron Allen himself, or perhaps the suicide of the friend. It also references the 3 deities of the trumpet, a recurring pattern of triads in these cases. He continued with a direct command to any future finder. "I forbid my family to touch it. It is to be deposited in the furthest corner of the safe." He folded the letter. He placed it inside the outer container, ensuring it would be the first thing seen by anyone who breached the seal. Heron Allen then transported the package to the Chancery Lane safe deposit. This location served as the fortress for London's legal and financial secrets. Deep underground, amidst corridors of steel and reinforced concrete, he leased a deposit box. The walk to the bank represented the final funeral procession of the object. He carried the weight of the amethyst through the streets of London, feeling the pull of its gravity one last time. He entered the vault. The heavy steel door swung open on oiled hinges. The air inside smelled of dust and paper. He placed the box in the furthest corner of the shelf. He closed the deposit box. He locked it. he walked away. For the remainder of his life, Edward Heron Allen respected the quarantine. He lived until 1943. For 39 years, the stone sat in the dark at Chancery Lane. The breathing in his study ceased. The shadows vanished. The scientist reclaimed his life, publishing his works on marine biology and Persian literature. He proved that the curse operated on proximity. By removing the object from his physical radius, he severed the connection. But Heron Allen understood that his death would break the contract. He knew that upon his passing, his assets would be liquidated or distributed. The stone would emerge again. To prevent this, he added a codicil to his will. The stone was not to be given to his daughters. It was not to be sold. He bequeathed the box to the Natural History Museum of London, but he attached a strict temporal lock. The museum accepted the donation on the condition that the box remain sealed for 3 years after his death. The box waited. The stone sat inside the silver snake ring, inside the leather, inside the wood, inside the steel of the bank vault. It waited for the man to die. It waited for the museum curators to break the seals. The 7-layer protocol worked as a temporary shield, but Heron Allen knew the truth of geology. Rocks outlive men. The amethyst had waited millions of years to be mined. 39 years in a bank vault meant nothing. Edward Heron Allen died in 1943. His death activated the final clause of his containment strategy. He intended for the box to remain sealed in the bank vault for 33 years post-mortem, a generational buffer designed to let the energy of the curse dissipate. His daughter, Amarel Heron Allen, rejected the temporal lock. Upon reviewing her father's will and locating the deposit box, she refused to act as the warden of the object. The fear implanted by the trebly accursed letter overrode the instruction for delay. She wanted the object out of the family estate immediately. In January 1944, Amarel presented the box to the Natural History Museum in South Kensington. At that time, the museum functioned as a branch of the British Museum. The curators accepted the donation, likely viewing it as a mineralogical curiosity from a distinguished Fellow of the Royal Society. They catalogued the item. It was logged into the permanent record as Accession 1944-30. The curators opened the box. They peeled back the 7 layers of protection engineered by Heron Allen. They removed the outer seals, the leather, the wood, and the velvet. They found the silver ring shaped like a double-headed snake. They found the 2 amethyst scarabs. And finally, they found the folded letter. The text of the letter entered the official institutional record. The curators read the warning: "This stone is trebly accursed." In a standard scientific context, such a note usually ends up in the trash, dismissed as Victorian melodrama. However, the specific gravity of Heron Allen's reputation prevented this disposal. The man was not a crackpot. He was a definitive scientific authority. The museum decided to preserve the context. They kept the letter with the stone. For decades, the Heron Allen amethyst sat in the mineralogy vault. It remained quiet. The museum environment, characterized by sterility and categorization, seemed to dampen the predatory nature of the object. Or perhaps, simply, no one spent enough time alone with it to become a host. Then came the modern era. In 2004, the Heron Allen Society organized a symposium. John Whitaker, the head of micropaleontology at the museum, retrieved the stone from the vault. He intended to transport it to the symposium as the centerpiece of a lecture on Heron Allen's life. Whitaker dismissed the curse. He treated the stone as a prop. During the transport, the atmospheric conditions shifted violently. A sudden, severe thunderstorm broke over the transport route, a meteorological callback to Indra, the storm god. Upon arrival, Whitaker fell ill. He suffered a debilitating kidney stone attack, a physical manifestation of a stone blocking the body's flow. Later, he experienced a severe stomach flu that incapacitated him. He recounted these events with a mixture of scientific skepticism and anecdotal dread. He noted the timing. The physical collapse occurred exactly when he removed the stone from its sanctuary. The museum reinstated the quarantine. Today, the Delhi Purple Sapphire resides in the vault of the Natural History Museum. It sits in a drawer, wrapped in its history. The curators handle it with a specific protocol, respectful, quick, and devoid of mockery. The object remains a paradox in the heart of a scientific institution. The Natural History Museum exists to explain the natural world through logic, evolution, and geology. Yet, inside the Heron Allen archive, they house an object that defies their entire epistemology. They keep it not because it is a rare mineral, amethyst is common, but because it possesses a narrative weight that exceeds its atomic structure. The sapphire operates as a curse of the intellect. It targeted Heron Allen, a man of reason, and forced him to build a shrine of silver and spells. It proved that intelligence offers no immunity to the irrational. This concludes the second case file. We have seen a trumpet that summons war to nations, and a stone that summons madness to the scholar. Now, the ladder of intimacy descends further. We move from the academic study to the center of high society. We move to a curse that does not just whisper in the dark, but eats wealth, destroys dynasties, and demands a body count in the headlines. We travel to France, to the court of the Sun King, to witness the birth of the most famous cursed object in human history. The Hope Diamond awaits. The third forensic file concerns an object that functions as a singularity of misfortune. While the trumpets affect nations and the sapphire affects the mind, this object targets the structural integrity of dynasties. It consumes status. It eats wealth. It is the most famous cursed object on Earth, yet its origins lie buried in the alluvial mud of the Golconda Sultanate. In the mid-17th century, the Kollur mine in India served as the primary source of the world's most spectacular diamonds. It was a place of extreme physical labor, where tens of thousands of workers excavated the gravel of the Krishna River, sifting for carbon anomalies. Into this landscape walked Jean-Baptiste Tavernier. Tavernier operated as a merchant of the highest caliber. He made 6 voyages to India, trading in gems that would define the crown jewels of Europe. In 1666, during his final voyage, he acquired a stone that defied standard valuation. The stone weighed 112 carats. It possessed a triangular shape, roughly cut according to the Indian tradition, which prioritized weight retention over brilliance. But the defining characteristic was the color. Geologically, this stone represents a Type 2B diamond. This classification indicates a specific contamination of the carbon lattice. During the stone's formation deep in the Earth's mantle, atoms of boron replaced carbon atoms. This chemical intrusion absorbs red, yellow, and green light, reflecting only a specific wavelength of deep, oceanic blue. In the 17th century, such a color was inexplicable. It appeared as a violation of the natural order of clear diamonds. Tavernier described it as a beautiful violet. The transaction remains a matter of historical dispute. The commercial record states that Tavernier purchased the stone from the mine owners. He paid a fair market price. The curse, however, rejects the receipt. The mythology of the object insists on a violation. The legend asserts that the diamond served as the eye of the goddess Sita, consort of Rama. It sat in a temple, watching the devotees. Tavernier, in this version of the narrative, acted as a thief. He plucked the eye from the idol, blinding the goddess and invoking a divine wrath that would follow the stone across oceans. This theft myth serves a psychological function. It justifies the suffering that follows. If the stone was simply bought, the deaths are accidents. If the stone was stolen from a god, the deaths are retribution. Tavernier brought the stone to France. He arrived at the court of Louis XIV, the Sun King, in 1668. He presented the blue diamond along with dozens of other gems. The king, obsessed with symbols of absolute power, recognized the stone as a supreme emblem of rarity. Louis XIV purchased the stone. He paid Tavernier 147,000 livres and granted him a patent of nobility. Tavernier retired to Switzerland, a wealthy man. Here, the narrative bifurcates. History records that Tavernier lived a long life, dying in Moscow at the age of 84. The curse narrative, however, demands a blood sacrifice to initiate the cycle. The legend claims that shortly after selling the stone, Tavernier was torn apart by wild dogs on the Russian frontier. The body was never found. This image, the merchant dismembered by beasts, sets the tone for the violence that follows. Louis XIV ordered the stone to be recut. He found the crude Indian shape insufficient for the glory of France. He handed the 112-carat violet stone to his court jeweler, Sieur Pitot. The instruction was to tame the wild geology into a symbol of civilized order. Pitot spent 2 years grinding the diamond. He reduced the weight from 112 carats to 67 1/8 carats. He sacrificed nearly half the stone to achieve symmetry. The result was a heart-shaped brilliant, known as the French blue, le bleu de France. The French blue became a part of the Golden Fleece, the supreme order of chivalry. Louis XIV wore it on a ribbon around his neck. He believed he had mastered the stone, but the biology of the king began to fail. Louis XIV, the longest reigning monarch in European history, watched his dynasty rot while the stone hung around his neck. He lost his son, the Grand Dauphin. He lost his grandson, the Duke of Burgundy. He lost his great-grandson, the Duke of Brittany. By the time of his death, the succession hung by a thread, resting on a 5-year-old boy, Louis XV. The stone passed down the line. It remained the crowning jewel of the French treasury. It waited for the monarchy to weaken. It waited for Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. The fall of the French monarchy created a vacuum of authority. In September 1792, while the king sat imprisoned and the guillotine waited, the crown jewels of France resided in the Garde Meuble, now the Hôtel de la Marine, on the Place de la Révolution. This building held the accumulated wealth of the Bourbon dynasty. Security at the Garde Meuble collapsed along with the government. For a period of 5 nights, from September 11th to September 17th, a gang of thieves led by Paul Miette treated the royal storehouse as an open bar. They broke in through a ground floor window. They did not grab and run. They stayed. They brought wine and food. They held a party amidst the treasures of the state, leisurely prying gems from their settings, while the city outside descended into the reign of terror. The Bleu de France, the heart-shaped symbol of Louis XIV, sat in the Golden Fleece insignia. The thieves dismantled the order. They took the gold, they took the spinels, and they took the 69-carat blue diamond. The stone vanished into the criminal underworld. For 20 years, the history of the diamond goes dark. This gap in the timeline represents the incubation period of the modern curse. During this time, the object underwent a radical surgical procedure. To sell the most famous diamond in Europe required a disguise. The Bleu de France possessed a unique shape and weight. Any jeweler in London, Amsterdam, or Antwerp would recognize the 69-carat heart. the possessor would face the guillotine. The solution required the destruction of value to ensure survival. The stone had to be recut. A master cutter, likely working in London under the direction of a fence, took the king's diamond and placed it against the wheel. This act was a geometric crime. To hide the identity of the stone, the cutter had to shear off nearly 24 carats of flawless blue diamond. He sacrificed 30% of the mass. He transformed the heart into a cushion antique. He squared the edges. He changed the facet pattern. He reduced the weight to 45.52 carats. This massive reduction served a singular purpose: to break the forensic link to the French crown. Modern forensic analysis confirms this mutilation. In 2005, researchers at the Smithsonian used computer modeling to compare the documented dimensions of the French blue with the 3D scan of the Hope diamond. The fit proved exact. The Hope diamond fits inside the French blue like a seed inside a fruit. The recutting was not random. It was a calculated subtraction designed to maximize weight retention while eliminating the heart shape. The timing of the stone's re-emergence provides the final piece of evidence. The statute of limitations for crimes committed during the French Revolution expired after 20 years. In September 1812, exactly 20 years and 2 days after the theft at the Garde Meuble, a large blue diamond appeared in the inventory of Daniel Eliasson, a London diamond merchant. The timing implies legal premeditation. The owners waited until the French government lost the legal right to claim the head of the thief. Daniel Eliasson documented the stone. He sketched it. He noted the weight, 45.52 carats. The Bleu de France was dead. The Eliasson blue was born. The curse, however, remained embedded in the atomic lattice. The boron impurities that created the blue color remained unchanged. The recutting altered the geometry of the light, but it did not alter the nature of the object. It simply concentrated the history. The stone now carried the weight of the color mine, the arrogance of Louis XIV, the blood of the French Revolution, and the deceit of the recut. The object eventually found its way to the banker Henry Philip Hope in 1839. Hope purchased the stone for a fraction of its original value, unaware, or perhaps willfully ignorant, that he was buying the stolen heart of the French monarchy. The name Hope attached itself to the stone. It became the Hope diamond. The irony of the name lies in the legacy it created. The Hope family dynasty, like the Bourbon dynasty before it, would crumble under the weight of the gem. The stone passed down the line, eroding the family fortune until it was sold to cover debts. But the true target of the curse was not the bankers. The true target was the American dream. The stone crossed the Atlantic in the early 20th century. It sought a new kind of royalty. It found Evelyn Walsh McLean. The trajectory of the Hope diamond follows the flow of global capital. In the 17th century, it resided in the absolute monarchy of France. In the 19th century, it moved to the banking houses of London. In the early 20th century, the center of gravity shifted to the industrial wealth of the United States. The diamond required a new host, one possessing the specific combination of limitless funds and reckless confidence. It found Evelyn Walsh McLean. Evelyn Walsh McLean stood as the archetype of the American heiress. Her fortune derived from the Camp Bird gold mine in Colorado, a geological stroke of luck that transformed her family from prospectors into potentates. She possessed the raw, unrefined energy of the New World. She collected diamonds not for their beauty, but for their volume. She treated gemstones as armor, layering them on her body to create a barrier of refracted light between herself and the world. In 1910, Pierre Cartier, one of the three brothers controlling the jewelry empire, identified McLean as the ideal custodial candidate for the Hope Diamond. He understood her psychology. He knew she possessed a rebellious streak, a desire to own things that others feared. Cartier acquired the stone. He recognized that the cushion antique cut looked dated. To appeal to an American heiress, the setting required modernization. He mounted the 45.52-carat blue diamond in a platinum framework. He surrounded the central abyss of the blue stone with 16 white cushion-cut diamonds. He suspended this pendant from a chain containing another 45 white diamonds. The design created a halo of white fire designed to accentuate the darkness of the center. The sale, however, relied on a narrative hook. Pierre Cartier did not hide the history of the stone. He amplified it. He presented the Hope Diamond to McLean not as a jewel, but as a challenge. He told her the legends of the Tavernier violation. He told her about the fall of Marie Antoinette. He whispered the rumors of the Russian prince, Kanitovsky, who had supposedly owned it and been assassinated. Most buyers would recoil. McLean leaned in. She operated under a personal superstition. She believed that objects considered unlucky for the general population brought good luck to her. She viewed herself as an exception to the metaphysical rules. She purchased the diamond for $180,000 in January 1911. Evelyn Walsh McLean brought the object to Washington, D.C. She integrated it into her daily physiology. She refused to keep it in a vault. She wore it to breakfast. She wore it while swimming. She wore it during high-stakes poker games. The diamond became her totem. The incubation period of the curse in the McLean household is characterized by a grotesque casualness. The most famous image of this era involves Mike, the family's Great Dane. During garden parties at her estate, Friendship, McLean would fasten the $180,000 necklace around the dog's neck. The massive blue stone would swing against the animal's fur as it wandered among senators, ambassadors, and socialites. This behavior signals a dangerous hubris. By placing the Eye of Sita on a dog, McLean reduced the curse to a parlor trick. She taunted the history of the object. She believed her wealth insulated her from the consequences that had befallen kings and bankers. For the first few years, the curse remained dormant. The McLeans lived at the apex of American society. Her husband, Ned McLean, owned the Washington Post. They owned estates, horses, and political influence. The diamond seemed to validate her theory that she was immune. But the diamond functions as a time-release toxin. It establishes dominance in the center of the home before it begins the extraction process. The extraction does not target the bank account immediately. It targets the biological legacy. The first crack in the McLean dynasty appeared in 1919. It did not involve money. It involved a truck and a 9-year-old boy. The Vinson incident marked the end of the party and the beginning of the Sunday blight. The incubation was over. The stone had successfully embedded itself in the center of the family. It had been welcomed, reset, worn, and mocked. Now, it prepared to consume the things Evelyn McLean valued more than her gold mines. The security apparatus focused on the wrong threat. Evelyn McLean lived in terror of kidnappers. She hired private detectives to watch her son, Vincent Walsh McLean, the $100 million baby. They watched the perimeter. They watched for men in masks. They failed to watch the road. On May 18, 1919, the curse leveraged the physics of the combustion engine. Vincent ran through the gates of the Friendship estate and onto Wisconsin Avenue. A Ford Model T, the symbol of American industrial progress, struck the child. The impact fractured the timeline of the family. Vincent survived the initial collision, but died hours later from internal injuries. The heir to the gold mine and the newspaper empire, the boy who slept in a cradle gifted by King Leopold, died on a Sunday. This established the pattern Evelyn later termed the Sunday Blight. Evelyn McLean refused to remove the diamond. During the funeral, while wearing the black veil of a grieving mother, the blue stone hung against her chest. She clung to the object with a pathological intensity, believing that the stone connected her to a plane of existence where tragedy was the norm. To cope with the grief, she turned to chemistry. She began a lifelong dependency on morphine, living in a twilight state where the blue of the diamond and the haze of the opiate blended into a single reality. The curse then pivoted to the patriarch. Ned McLean, the owner of the Washington Post, crumbled under the weight of the loss. He lacked his wife's manic resilience. He retreated into alcohol. The stewardship of one of America's most important newspapers requires clarity. Ned McLean offered only drunken erraticism. The financial dissolution followed the psychological collapse. In 1933, the unthinkable happened. The McLean family lost the Washington Post. A bankruptcy court forced the sale of the paper to Eugene Meyer. The voice of the family was silenced. Ned McLean's trajectory ended in confinement. The man who had hosted presidents and kings died in St. Shepard's and Enoch Pratt Hospital, a mental asylum, in 1941. The diagnosis listed non-alcoholic insanity, a polite medical euphemism for the total disintegration of the mind. The diamond remained with Evelyn. She lived in the wreckage of her empire, still hosting parties, still wearing the stone, still feeding the legend. But the stone required a final payment from the bloodline. In 1946, her daughter, also named Evelyn, Evie, aged 25, was found dead. The cause was an overdose of sleeping pills. The curse had consumed the heir, Vincent, the husband, Ned, and the daughter, Evie. The consumer of wealth had completed its audit. The McLean fortune, once measured in endless veins of Colorado gold, now consisted of a house full of ghosts and a single blue diamond. Evelyn Walsh McLean died 1 year later, in 1947. She died of pneumonia, but the autopsy of her life reveals the true cause: systemic attrition by proximity to the object. She left behind a complex estate of debts and assets. The diamond, the primary asset, had to be liquidated to satisfy the claims of the creditors. This liquidation brought the object to the attention of the final character in our drama, a man who did not view diamonds as mystical objects, but as inventory. Harry Winston, the king of diamonds, prepared to acquire the stone. Winston bought the entire estate. He acquired the Hope Diamond, the Star of the East, and the rest of the McLean jewelry hoard. He held the stone for 9 years. He exhibited it. He toured it. But unlike the previous owners, he never wore it. He respected the radioactive nature of the asset. In 1958, Harry Winston made the ultimate containment move. He decided to donate the stone to the Smithsonian Institution. He sought to place it in the custody of the American people, effectively nationalizing the curse. The method of delivery he chose remains the supreme irony of the stone's history. Harry Winston approached the transfer as a logistical puzzle. He rejected the use of armored convoys. He rejected the spectacle of armed guards. He understood that the safest way to transport an object of infinite value involves the camouflage of banality. He chose the United States Postal Service. On November 8, 1958, a clerk in Winston's New York office wrapped the Hope Diamond. They placed the platinum necklace, which had once hung around the neck of Marie Antoinette and the Great Dane of Evelyn Walsh McLean, into a simple box. They wrapped the box in brown craft paper. They tied it with twine. The clerk walked to the post office. The transaction at the counter stands as the supreme irony of the gem's history. The postage cost $2.44. Winston paid an additional $142.85 for insurance, covering the package for $1 million. This valuation represented a fraction of the stone's true worth, but it satisfied the bureaucratic requirement for registered mail. The package entered the stream of federal mail. It traveled from New York to Washington, D.C. in a canvas sack, tumbling alongside letters to grandmothers, bills, and catalogs. The anonymity of the brown paper provided a security shield more effective than steel. No thief looks for the crown jewel of France in a sack of junk mail. On November 10th, the package arrived at the main post office in Washington, D.C. It fell into the hands of a specific letter carrier, James G. Todd. Todd delivered the package to the Natural History Museum. Dr. Leonard Carmichael, the secretary of the Smithsonian, waited to receive it. The handover took place without fanfare. Carmichael signed the receipt. He took a pair of scissors. He cut the twine. He tore the brown paper. The blue stone emerged from the wrapping. With this action, the ownership transferred from the private sector to the public trust. The Hope Diamond became the property of the American people. However, the curse operates on a principle of kinetic energy. When the primary host, Winston, releases the object, the accumulated energy discharges into the nearest conductive vessel. In this transaction, Harry Winston escaped unscathed. The discharge hit the conduit, James G. Todd. The fate of the mailman provides the final forensic footnote to the diamond's active period. In the year following the delivery, the statistical probability of misfortune in Todd's life collapsed. First, a truck accident crushed his leg, shattering the bone and ending his career as a walking carrier. Second, his wife died suddenly of a heart attack. Third, his dog strangled itself on its own leash, a grotesque echo of the golden fleece ribbon that held the diamond around Louis XIV's neck. Finally, his house burned to the ground. Todd survived these events, but his life lay in ruins. He served as the final casualty, the shipping cost, exacted by the stone for its safe passage into the museum. The diamond now rests in a rotating enclosure made of 3-inch thick bulletproof glass. It spins slowly, allowing 6 million visitors a year to gaze into the boron-contaminated lattice. The stone has remained dormant since 1958. It seems that the Smithsonian, by turning the object into a public exhibit, diluted the curse. When everyone owns it, no single person can be destroyed by it. The curse of kings concludes here. We have witnessed the destruction of the French monarchy, the bankruptcy of the Hope banking family, the annihilation of the Maclean dynasty, and the dismantling of a mailman's life. But the anthology of the cursed requires a shift in mechanics. We leave the world of static objects, stones and trumpets, and enter the world of complex machinery. We move from the slow decay of wealth to the instantaneous violence of speed. On a highway in California, a different kind of mineral, aluminum, waits to kill an icon. The curse shifted from geology to engineering. It abandoned the slow timescales of diamond formation and adopted the instantaneous violence of the internal combustion engine. In the mid-20th century, the objects of destruction ceased to be ancient artifacts and became consumer products. On September 21st, 1955, James Dean walked into Competition Motors in Hollywood. He traded in his white Porsche 356 Speedster for a machine designed with a single purpose: velocity. The Porsche 550 Spider, chassis number 550-0055, stood as a triumph of minimalism. German engineers designed it to dominate the 1.5-litre racing class. They stripped away every ounce of non-essential matter. They built the body from hand-beaten aluminum sheets, so thin that a heavy thumbprint could dent the fender. They stretched this skin over a tubular steel ladder frame. The entire vehicle weighed approximately 550 kilograms, less than the weight of a prize-winning cow. This lack of mass created a formidable power-to-weight ratio, but it also created a structural vulnerability. In 1955, automotive safety standards did not exist for racing prototypes. The car lacked a roll bar. It lacked side impact protection. It lacked seat belts. The driver sat in a low-slung bucket seat, his hips inches above the asphalt, surrounded by a fragile envelope of alloy. The car functioned less like a vehicle and more like a motorized skate. Dean treated the purchase as an escalation of his identity. He sought to brand the machine. He hired Dean Jeffries, a legendary pinstriper, to customize the silver paint. On the hood and doors, Jeffries painted the number 130 in black. On the rear cowling, in a script that looked jagged and hurried, he painted the nickname Dean had chosen, Little Bastard. The engine defined the car's personality. The Type 547 Fuhrmann motor sat just behind the driver's head. It was a complex, temperamental piece of machinery. An air-cooled, four-cam flat four, it utilized a system of bevel gears and shafts to drive the valvetrain. It produced 110 horsepower at 6,200 RPM. This sounds modest by modern standards, but in a car weighing 550 kilos, it provided acceleration capable of snapping the neck. The mechanics at Competition Motors knew the car required respect. Rolf Wutherich, the factory-trained mechanic assigned to Dean, understood the physics of the Spider. He knew the rear weight bias made the car prone to oversteer. If the driver lifted off the throttle in a corner, the heavy rear end would act like a pendulum, swinging the car into a spin. The Spider demanded constant aggression. It punished hesitation. Dean took possession of the car with the intent to race it at Salinas. But before the tires touched the track, the car received a forensic warning. On September 23, 1955, 7 days before the crash, James Dean met the British actor Alec Guinness outside the Villa Capri restaurant in Los Angeles. Dean, proud of his new purchase, showed the silver Spider to Guinness. Guinness, a man known for his reserve, experienced a visceral reaction to the machine. He looked at the low profile, the thin skin, and the aggressive stance. He told Dean, verbatim, "If you get in that car, you will be found dead in it by this time next week." Dean laughed. He dismissed the warning as the theatrics of an older generation. He viewed the car as a tool of liberation, an extension of his own nervous system. He failed to see it as a collection of kinetic vectors waiting to resolve themselves against a solid object. The Spider sat in his driveway for the next week, ticking like a bomb. The aluminum cooled and expanded with the California heat. The fluid settled in the lines. The car waited for the trip to Salinas. It waited for Route 466. The Little Bastard differs from the Hope Diamond. The diamond required centuries to ruin a family. The Spider required only a split second of physics to create a legend. The curse of the Spider is about the unforgiving nature of velocity. The timeline of the disaster began with a citation. At 3:30 p.m., Officer O.T. Hunter of the California Highway Patrol flagged the Silver Spider south of Bakersfield. He clocked the vehicle at 65 miles per hour in a 55 zone. Dean signed the ticket. This interaction established a forensic timestamp. It placed the vehicle on a specific trajectory toward the Cholome Valley, moving at a pace that ensured an intersection with the Ford Tudor at exactly 5:45 p.m. Dean continued north. His factory-trained mechanic, Rolf Wutherich, sat in the passenger seat. The car ran well. The air-cooled engine, loud and vibrating directly against their spines, pushed the lightweight chassis through the heat of the afternoon. They stopped at Blackwell's Corner for a final meal. Apples and Coca-Cola. The sugar and caffeine entered Dean's bloodstream. The fuel entered the Porsche's tank. Both machines resumed their course. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the optical conditions of Route 466 deteriorated. The little bastard presented a unique visual hazard. The car stood only 39 inches tall. Its bodywork consisted of unpainted, polished aluminum. Under the glare of the setting sun, the silver metal reflected the colors of the gray asphalt and the golden hills. The car functioned as a mirror, camouflaging itself against the environment. To an oncoming driver, the Spider appeared not as a vehicle, but as a heat shimmer or a shadow on the road. At the intersection of Route 466 and Route 41, the physics of the collision assembled. Donald Turnipseed, a 23-year-old student at Cal Poly, drove a 1950 Ford Tudor Coupe east on Route 466. He approached the Y junction. He intended to make a left turn onto Route 41. The Ford Tudor weighed approximately 3,200 pounds. It was a mass of heavy American steel, built with rigid bumpers and a high center of gravity. In a collision, it acted as an anvil. Dean approached from the west. The sun sat directly in his eyes, or possibly behind him, blinding Turnipseed. Accounts vary, but the silver-on-grey camouflage remains the primary factor. Dean saw the Ford begin to cross the center line. He believed the other driver saw him. He uttered his final recorded words to Vutherick. "That guy's got to stop. He'll see us." Turnipseed executed the turn. He perceived an empty road. The impact occurred at a closing speed of approximately 70 miles per hour. Dean at 55, Turnipseed crossing at 15. The laws of conservation of momentum dictated the result. The Ford Tudor, possessing double the mass, dominated the vector. It shattered the forward motion of the Porsche instantly. The Spider did not crumple like a modern car designed with safety cells. It buckled. The left front quadrant collapsed. The force of the deceleration ejected Rolf Vutherick from the open cockpit. He flew through the air, landing in the dirt shoulder with a shattered jaw and a broken femur. His ejection saved his life. James Dean remained inside the machine. The steering column, a solid steel shaft, absorbed the impact force and drove backward. Dean's body continued forward at 55 miles per hour while the car stopped. The resulting G-force snapped his neck. The medical report lists the cause of death as a broken neck, massive internal injuries, and multiple fractures. The event happened faster than the human nervous system processes pain. The Porsche spun violently, coming to rest on its wheels near a fence. It looked like a crushed soda can. Steam hissed from the ruptured oil lines of the Foreman engine. Turnipseed's Ford slid 30 feet and stopped. The driver emerged with a bloody nose and a bruised shoulder. The weight disparity of the vehicles determined the survival rate. The heavy steel fortress protected the student. The aluminum skin coffin killed the star. The wreckage sat in the twilight. The little bastard had fulfilled the prophecy of Alec Guinness exactly 7 days after the warning. But the energy of the event did not dissipate with the crash. The kinetic violence infused the metal itself. Usually, a totaled car goes to the scrapyard. It gets melted down. It returns to the elemental pool. But the fame of James Dean prevented this recycling. The car possessed value as a macabre totem. People wanted to touch it. People wanted to own a piece of the tragedy. George Barris, the custom car king of Hollywood, purchased the wreck. He paid $2,500 for the twisted lump of aluminum and steel. He planned to tour it. He planned to sell parts to other racers. He made a miscalculation. He assumed the little bastard was dead. He failed to realize that the mechanical malice of the object remained active. The car was no longer a vehicle. It was a contagion, and Barris was about to spread it across the American racing circuit. George Barris viewed the wreckage as an asset. In the custom car culture of 1950s Los Angeles, metal possessed fluidity. A crashed car served as raw material, a donor body to be stripped, reshaped, or sold for parts. Barris paid $2,500 for the twisted remains of chassis. He intended to monetize the tragedy. The malice of the object manifested immediately upon arrival at Barris Custom City in North Hollywood. As the crew attempted to offload the wreck from the transport trailer, the physics of the situation shifted. The securing chains slipped. The wreckage, weighing a mere 550 kilograms but carrying a heavier metaphysical load, lurched downward. It struck a mechanic. Accounts vary. Some cite Barris himself, crushing his leg. This fracture served as the introductory handshake. The car, even in a static state, retained the capacity to inflict blunt force trauma. Barris proceeded with the dissection. He treated the car like a carcass in a butchery. He removed the doors, the hood, and the suspension. Most importantly, he extracted the heart and the spine of the machine, the Fuhrmann 4-cam engine, and the transaxle transmission. These components remained mechanically sound. The crash had destroyed the frame and the bodywork, but the dense, complex engineering of the powertrain survived. Barris listed the organs for sale. 2 doctors from the Los Angeles area answered the ad. Dr. Troy McHenry, a physician from Beverly Hills, and Dr. William Eschrid, a surgeon from Burbank, acted as gentlemen racers. They competed in the amateur SCCA circuit. They sought an edge. The Porsche Spider engine represented the pinnacle of German engineering. They bought the parts. McHenry purchased the engine. He installed the little bastard's heart into his own car. Eschrid purchased the drivetrain. He installed the little bastard's transmission into his Lotus 9 Special. The transplant was complete. The mechanical contagion now resided in 2 separate host vehicles. The energy that had killed James Dean on Route 466 had been divided and inserted into new systems. The convergence occurred on October 21st, 1956. The venue was the Pomona Road Races at the Los Angeles County Fairgrounds. Both doctors entered their vehicles. Both vehicles contained the DNA of the little bastard. The race began. The cars circulated the track. The probability of 2 independent mechanical failures occurring to 2 specific cars in the same race remains statistically negligible. Yet, the curse operates on a narrative logic, not a statistical one. Dr. William Eschrid entered a corner. The transmission, the very unit extracted from the Dean wreck, seized. The gears locked. The kinetic energy of the car, suddenly deprived of rotation, translated into a rollover. The car flipped. Eschrid survived, but he suffered serious injuries, pulled from the crushed cockpit in a state of trauma that mirrored the original accident. Moments later, Dr. Troy McHenry lost control. He drove the car powered by Dean's engine. He did not roll. He left the track. The car struck the only tree in the immediate vicinity. The impact killed Dr. Troy McHenry instantly. The engine, the Fuhrmann 4-cam that had powered Dean to his death, sat directly behind McHenry's spine. For the second time in 13 months, this specific block of aluminum and steel propelled a driver into a fatal stop. The Pomona disaster confirmed the forensic profile of the wreckage. It proved that the little bastard was not a passive victim of a crash, but an active carrier of lethal momentum. The parts did not just fail, they attacked. A third incident reinforces the pattern. Barris had sold the 2 rear tires from the wreck to a young New Yorker. Tires, unlike engines, are consumables. They have a shelf life. The buyer mounted them on his car. During a drive, both tires blew out simultaneously. The car crashed into a ditch. The driver survived to report the anomaly. Tires do not typically fail in perfect synchronization unless they share a common, catastrophic history. George Barris watched the reports come in. He realized that selling the parts constituted a public health hazard. He decided to stop the harvest. He reassembled the remaining shell, the twisted frame, the crumpled aluminum skin, and the empty engine bay. He welded the chassis back together, creating a hollow effigy of the death car. He decided to pivot from parts supplier to showman. If the car insisted on being a spectacle, he would put it on stage. He lent the wreck to the National Safety Council. He planned to tour it across high schools and fairgrounds as a safety exhibit, a gore-soaked warning to teenagers. He assumed that welding the car into a static display would neutralize it. He assumed that a car without an engine could not kill. He was wrong. The survival of the object requires analysis. George Barris transitioned the car from a source of parts to a traveling exhibit. He labeled it James Dean's last sports car and leased it to the National Safety Council. The intent was to scare teenagers into safe driving. The result was a cross-country trail of pyrotechnics and kinetic failures. In March 1959, the tour stopped in Fresno, California. The car resided in a garage facility overnight. A fire broke out. The blaze consumed the structure. The roof collapsed. The wooden beams turned to ash. The fire melted the rubber tires of vehicles stored nearby. Yet, amidst this inferno, the little bastard remained. The aluminum skin blackened with soot, and the paint blistered, but the metal refused to melt. The car emerged from the ashes of the garage just as it had emerged from the gully on Route 466. Ruined, but present. The transport of the vehicle proved equally hazardous. During the tour, the truck carrying the display lost its brakes on a highway. The driver lost control. The truck crashed. The impact threw the driver from the cab, killing him, George Barkas. The Porsche broke its restraints, rolled off the flatbed, and landed on the asphalt, crushing the driver or simply waiting for the next victim. The pattern reinforced itself. The car acted as a kinetic projectile that targeted anyone tasked with moving it. By 1960, George Barris decided to end the tour. The liability exceeded the profit. The car had traveled from California to Florida, leaving a wake of broken legs, fires, and fatalities. He ordered the wreckage returned to Los Angeles. The logistics of this final transport define the ultimate mystery of the case. Barris hired a transport company to move the car from Miami to Los Angeles. To ensure security, they loaded the Porsche into a railroad boxcar. Some accounts cite a sealed truck trailer. They secured the car with chains. They locked the doors. They placed a lead seal on the latch, a tamper-evident device that requires bolt cutters to remove. The train crossed the continent. It passed through the rail yards of the South and the deserts of the Southwest. It arrived in Los Angeles. Barris stood on the platform. The crew broke the seal. They slid the heavy steel door open. The boxcar contained air. It contained dust. It contained the loose chains lying on the floor. It did not contain the Porsche. The physics of the theft defy explanation. A 550 Spider, even a wrecked one, weighs 1,200 pounds. It occupies a physical volume of approximately 12 feet by 5 feet. To remove it from a moving train requires a coordinated team, heavy equipment, and a disregard for life. To remove it from a stationary train without breaking the seal implies an impossible geometry, a theft that occurred from the inside out, or a falsification of the manifest. Barris hired Pinkerton detectives. They traced the route. They interrogated the crews. They found nothing. No scrap metal dealer reported receiving a crumpled aluminum shell. No collector admitted to buying it. The car simply ceased to exist in the observable universe. The disappearance creates a permanent open loop in the narrative. Unlike the Hope Diamond, which rests in a glass case, or the trumpets, which rest in a museum drawer, the little bastard remains at large. It exists in the realm of rumor. Reports surface periodically. A man in Washington state claims to see it in a barn. A collector in Japan claims to have the steering wheel. The transaxle, the one that injured Dr. Eschrid, eventually surfaced in the hands of a collector, confirming that the parts dispersed by Barris survived. But the chassis, the body that killed Dean, remains missing. The bounty reflects the enduring threat. The Volo Auto Museum in Illinois currently offers $1 million for the authenticated chassis of the car. They seek to put the ghost back in a cage, but for 60 years, the car has evaded capture. The disappearance of the Porsche offers a final lesson. We assume that cursed objects are static, stones that sit in vaults, or trumpets that sit in cases. We assume we can lock them away. But the little bastard proves that malice can be mobile. It can be an engine block. It can be a transmission. It can be a fugitive. We have examined the curses that target the pillars of human vanity: the empire, the intellect, the dynasty, and the icon. In every case, the object outlived the owner. The diamond survives the banker. The trumpet survives the pharaoh. The car survives the driver. Matter is patient. It waits for the moment of hubris. It waits for the moment we think we are in control. And then, it reminds us that we are merely temporary custodians of things that do not care if we live or die. The chassis is still out there. It is waiting for the next mechanic to find it in a barn, brush off the dust, and check the VIN number. And when they do, the physics of the crash will resume exactly where they left off.